Hey everyone, and welcome to a story where fate collides with fantasy, literally. Imagine waking up in a world you once read about, but this time you're not the heroes. Meet Saul, a reserved young man with memories of another life, a grumpy mentor, and a quiet village nestled on the edge of disaster. But as ancient legends stir and forgotten creatures take flight, Saul discovers that even side characters have a destiny. Grab your gear, because the mist is lifting, the apocalypse is coming, and our journey is just beginning. I accept, Saul replied. The deal wasn't particularly in his favor. After all, a fallen god had more power than most beings, but still paled compared to nearly every divine. Based on the novel he had read, fallen gods were deities cast down into the human realm. Still, whether or not the agreement suited him didn't bother Saul. He intended to make it work in his favor. As I expected, humans are truly pitiful. Wait, did you just agree? The phoenix asked, suddenly surprised. I meant what I said, I accept, but I have one condition, Saul stated. More conditions. Very well, whatever they are, they're nothing to a glorious being such as myself, the phoenix boasted. Saul continued, my only condition is the inclusion of a death vow to seal the pact. But if a mighty phoenix can't manage that, I completely understand. He struggled to suppress a grin, although it wasn't like the bird could detect it. That had clearly struck a nerve. I am the phoenix, I never break my word. But if it shall ease your worries, then so be it, the phoenix declared, enthusiastic and oblivious to anything suspicious in the arrangement. In its eagerness, it immediately began the death vow. In this universe, even deities weren't immune to death vows. Should they renege, they would surely fall into eternal slumber. Saul lacked magic. His soul didn't originate from this world, and no rational god would willingly be his guardian. In the name of the Lord of Death, I, the mighty and dreadful Phoenix, shall henceforth be. What's your name again? Saul, the Phoenix continued. Yes, Saul's guardian from this moment on. I shall aid him in defending his village. Should I fail to uphold my promise, I will perish instantly. A dark aura enveloped them both and was absorbed into their beings. Saul embarked for the Sebet kingdom. Known for its vast wealth, arguably the richest realm in this world, it was the fastest route to earning money. The Phoenix focused on upholding their recent vow. The two agreed to reunite after 3 months, when the apocalypse scenarios were set to begin. In the book Saul had read, a surprise meteor shower devastated the world. This marked the first scenario. Then the gods descended, selecting humans as their charges and imbuing them with divine auras. These individuals were termed God's children. Saul now belonged in that category. Even if his god was fallen, a fallen god remained a god nonetheless. After 4 days of travel, Saul reached a village near the capital. He came upon a cheap inn on its outskirts and decided to stay the night. Young man, what brings you to our modest home? A cheerful, chubby old man inquired. I need a room for the night, Saul responded, producing the coins. 3 coppers as indicated by the sign outside, the old man said, eyes curving like crescent moons as he took the money. Something about the situation seemed a little off to Saul, but he brushed the feeling aside. There weren't better options. He would rather not risk freezing to death overnight. That boy looks so thin, he might be starving, Saul thought as he followed the lad to his room. After 4 nights without rest, he finally allowed himself sleep. As if he pushed one more day, it felt like he might collapse into endless slumber. Tomorrow, he planned to visit the guild hall to find quick-paying jobs. As a sudden sensation crept over Saul, the eerie feeling of being watched. He cautiously peeled his eyes open, only to discover that the frail boy from earlier was intently staring at him. For an instant, Saul's heart nearly skipped a beat as the childlike figure, no, not a child, a monster in disguise, lunged toward him as though intending to consume him. Saul had previously noted the boy seemed malnourished, but becoming his food source was far from what he had in mind. Instinctively, Saul unsheathed his sword and plunged it into the creature's abdomen. But the blow had no effect. If anything, it made the monster even more savage. Hungry, it shrieked, charging ferociously. Without hesitation, Saul slashed at the creature's throat, bringing the frail monstrosity crashing to the floor with a screech so sharp it pierced the air. The creature, formerly a boy, was in fact a mimic, a monster by that name. Saul recalled a scene from a novel in which a swarm of mimics lured the protagonist in under the pretense of offering shelter. Those creatures only grew wilder with every injury, showing neither pain nor fear, even when their limbs were severed. The protagonist in that story had realized too late that decapitation was their only true weakness. Suddenly, bang, the door burst open and into the room strode an older figure, an adult mimic. "Your son tried to eat my brains. It was self-defense, I swear, Mr. Mimic," said Saul, tension rising as he readied himself to flee. The elder mimic let out an enraged roar and launched an attack. Saul, lacking any magical abilities, could rely on nothing but his raw physical prowess. Until the world's apocalyptic scenarios unfolded, magic and skills remained out of reach. Saul managed to escape the inn, running deep into the forest. In their frenzied state, mimics lost nearly all their senses, save for sight and a primal urge to kill. Saul planned to exploit this weakness. Concealing himself among the trees, he understood he'd have only one chance to land a fatal blow. To generate the necessary force, he'd need either considerable weight or extreme speed. Gravity would be his ally. He secured a hefty rock to his blade, scaled the tallest tree within reach, and lay in wait. When the mimic drew near beneath the tree, Saul leapt, sword first, the full weight of the rock accelerating his strike. The blow landed perfectly, and the mimic let out a final, anguished scream. Slamming into the earth, Saul collapsed, drained and wounded, his body marred with cuts and blood soaking the ground beneath him. His breath came in labored gasps, and his vision began to blur when a male voice echoed through the clearing, amused and calm. That was quite a show. Before Saul could identify the speaker, darkness claimed him. Destruction was everywhere, flames spread across the village, and thick smoke blanketed the heavens. Saul hurried to locate Carl and the children. His legs trembled under him, but he pushed himself forward, sprinting into the forest until he spotted their home. Staggering slightly, he steadied himself and kicked the door in. Inside lay the lifeless bodies of his beloved family, Carl and the kids, drenched in blood. The sight was beyond horrifying. Saul's chest caved with despair. He was paralyzed, unable to advance further. The devastation was so overwhelming that not a single tear escaped. Instead, he choked on sorrow. The bright light filtering through the window made him squint as he tried to compose himself, gulping deep breaths. The sweat clung to him like a second skin. Thank goodness, it had only been a nightmare, though its vividness made it feel far too real to dismiss. Surveying his surroundings, Saul recognized the hospital room. That man from the previous night likely brought him here. After taking a shower, he stepped outside for some air. The outdoors was lively, a mix of the scent of freshly baked curry buns and the salty wind from the sea filled the air. Towering structures adorned in gleaming gold loomed over the bustling streets where merchants sold everything imaginable from seafood to slaves. He had arrived at Sebet, the capital city. Zal bought a tent and pitched a humble stall to market the goods he had collected from the mist village and the forest of darkness. And to his surprise, the shop quickly became a local sensation, as items from those areas were rarely seen. Time flew, and it was already evening. Heading back to his inn, one that was well known and a bit on the expensive side, Saul still carried the haunting memory of his dream. As he approached, he spotted a man with blonde hair and crimson eyes. The man's identity was unmistakable. "Nice inn, isn't it?" Saul said, attempting to strike up a casual conversation. The man narrowed his eyes at Saul and replied with a sigh, "Get to the point. Can we talk somewhere more private?" The stranger studied Saul briefly, as though assessing the threat level, and then nodded, likely deciding Saul posed no danger. They met in the blonde man's personal room, which was incredibly lavish, worthy of royalty. "So what do you want to say? I need your help to prevent a future apocalypse," Saul declared. The prince was wary and pragmatic, unlikely to believe a tale sparked by a dream or book. "What apocalypse?" he asked, puzzled. "I can see parts of the future or something like that," Saul admitted, and it was true. The prince scoffed. The whole idea seemed absurd, but Saul had no choice. He needed the prince if he wanted to survive. "I know your true identity, Arthur Flynn Calypso, the third prince of the Calypso kingdom," Saul claimed with confidence. "As if you're aware, stop lying and I might let you live," the prince replied coldly. "I'm serious, I can prove it." "Fine. You get one shot, and if you waste it, your fate will be far worse than death," the prince warned, grinning. "Within days, the city will be swallowed by the sea. That's absurd. All available data confirms there's no expected sea level rise. I don't even know why I'm still listening. This time, the sea won't rise, something else will happen." Later, the unthinkable occurred. The entire capital city was consumed by water when an inexplicable portal opened within the city itself. The purpose behind the author's decision to include such a portal remained shrouded in mystery. Still, it had occurred in the novel, so chances were it would unfold the same way in reality. "I will see you again," he said, pausing briefly before adding, "If you truly know what's to come, then surely you can tell whether I'll end up killing you, can't you?" Instantly, Saul found himself outside the room, his stomach churning. That bastard had used teleportation magic, so he could use teleportation even before the scenarios began. The novel didn't elaborate much on the time prior to the apocalypse, leaving Saul in the dark about such capabilities. Eh. The following day, Saul ordered room service and was just about to dig into his food when, without warning, a man appeared in his room. It was that wretched prince again. "So?" Saul asked, masking his initial surprise. "You were spot on about the land sinking." Saul gave a slight nod. "I raised the barrier last night as a precaution based on your warning, so the city's been spared. It's thanks to you. What are you trying to tell me?" Saul replied, wearing a smug expression. "I'm ready to hear what you have to say." Saul seized the opportunity to explain to the prince how gods and demons might start appearing in the future. By the time he finished, the prince had one eyebrow slightly arched and a hand covering his mouth. Saul went on, "When the time comes, I want to form a partnership." A partnership? The prince weighed the pros and cons, then gave a reluctant nod. "Once the scenarios are underway, I expect us to support each other, understood." "And why should I take you as my partner?" he challenged. "Because I already know how the scenarios unfold. I can help you save the world while keeping casualties to a minimum," said Saul, smirking, confident he had won the argument. For a prince like Arthur, the welfare of his people was paramount, more so than for anyone else. With arms crossed, the prince evaluated his options and finally muttered, "All right, but if you become a liability, don't expect me to hesitate before cutting you loose." He went on grumbling about sending Saul to train with the Silver Rose Knight Order due to how poorly he fought. "You're not my commander, Your Highness. We're equals now," Saul responded. "But you'll only go after your embarrassing display against those mimics." "Fine, I'll do it. Outside, just call me Flynn. I use my middle name when in disguise." "And call me Saul," he said with a smile as the sky melted into the sea. Saul's fists tightened and a flush crept up his face. The sound of clinking metal echoed as the handcuffs shifted with his movements, and he grimaced when the cold restraints bit into his skin. A woody scent permeated the air, mingling with the ominous stillness as an unconscious Flynn and a woman lay motionless on the dim wooden floor, both bound in cuffs that suppressed their magic. Meanwhile, a masked man lashed an elderly man who had dared to resist him. It had been 5 days since Sebet's capital finally emerged from beneath the floodwaters. The city's barrier was so impenetrable that even the prince had been unable to teleport beyond it. When the opportunity eventually presented itself, they wasted no time and departed swiftly in the direction of the Calypso kingdom. However, their expedition came to an abrupt end as they were confronted by a menacing group that barred their passage. "These ones will sell for a good price," commented the group's leader, a red-headed man, his subordinates nodding in agreement as they launched an attack on Saul and Arthur. "You're going to regret that," Arthur retorted before driving his knee into one of the assailants. Saul swung his blade in wild arcs, intent on avoiding injury. This ambush did not occur in the novel. The Phoenix was a narrative exception, but this situation was novel and hinted at the possibility that another person like Saul existed. Arthur, on the other hand, overpowered the attackers effortlessly without even drawing his sword. He teleported from spot to spot, mercilessly pummeling their enemies. Then, in an instant, 2 arrows tore through the air and struck both young men. The world seemed to slow. Though Saul continued swinging, as if his very life hung in the balance, Arthur clutched the spot where the arrow landed before collapsing unconscious. The red-haired leader approached Saul and remarked, "Something must be wrong with the arrows. They drain magic. Even gods can't resist them. That must be it." "Now be a good boy and sleep," he said before knocking Saul out with a punch. In this world, magic coursed through beings like blood, and losing too much at once could be fatal. Though lacking magic came with many drawbacks, this one moment presented a rare advantage. The door creaked open, jolting Saul out of his reverie. As a striking woman with flowing ginger hair entered, flanked by nearly 20 burly bodyguards. Bringing up the rear was an elderly man. "We have premium offerings today, Miss Rose," the old man said, indicating the various captives, including both Saul and Arthur. Several dark-skinned individuals with blonde hair from Sebet were also imprisoned in cages. These were unmistakably slavers, and fear surged through Saul's chest. The woman, referred to as Rose, stepped forward and halted beside the now-awake girl. "She's pretty, she'll suffice." Lady Rose, the ginger-haired woman, was destined to be Arthur's fiancée and was, in Saul's opinion, the most exasperating character in the entire book. Saul found her so irritating that he had almost set the novel on fire twice. The blonde woman stood motionless as one man flung her into the air, her cuffs bound. Rose's gaze swept the confines of the room, ultimately focusing on Saul, making his heart momentarily freeze. Her smile widened as she approached, cupping Saul's face in her hands. "The brown hair is a rarity around here. Tell me, where are you from?" Saul met her eyes but held his tongue. "You have just my type of face." "I'm taking you too," she declared with a smirk and gestured to her men. One of them grabbed Saul and raised him by the cuffs, his body paralyzed with shock. Saul had fought monsters, but striking humans was another matter. Then a deep, gravelly voice echoed from nearby. "You're not taking him anywhere, my lady." It was the prince, finally awake and ready to stand in Saul's defense. "Another fine specimen. Today's selection is truly impressive. I'll be taking this one too," she remarked, nodding as a second man reached for Arthur's cuffs. In a flash, Arthur yanked his cuffs toward himself and drove his knee into the man's gut. The man coughed up blood and collapsed unconscious. "You seriously think a pair of cuffs could hold me?" "Don't make me laugh," Arthur growled, dodging a punch. He swept the bodyguard's legs out from beneath him, and when the man doubled over in pain, Arthur latched his handcuffs around the guard's neck and slammed him headfirst into the table. Chaos erupted as Arthur tore through his captors, fists flying, chairs upturned, and somewhere in the midst of the melee, the woman and elderly man vanished. As every captive meant to be sold into slavery was freed, all who remained in the room were the blonde woman, the prince, and Saul. Wiping the sweat from his brow, Arthur said, "Consider that repayment for saving Sebet's capital." "Oh, I guess I can accept that," came the reply. The blonde woman simply observed their exchange, her expression a mix of astonishment and admiration. Now that Saul had a proper view of her, he noticed how unremarkable she appeared, almost as though she blended into the background. Her blonde hair and pale eyes gave her a quiet, subtle beauty, not the kind that drew immediate attention. "What's your name, my lady?" the prince inquired. "Cynthia," she answered, blushing. Saul couldn't fathom why she hadn't fled like the others. "You're free to leave now, you know," he said awkwardly, reluctant to acquire unwanted company on the road. "I've nowhere else to go," she replied. "You don't seem like you're from Sebet," the prince said, scrutinizing her. "For the time being, I'll take you in under my protection as the third prince of the Calypso kingdom," he added, his tone suddenly sharp. "However, if you bring me any trouble, you won't live to regret it." This foolish prince, Saul thought bitterly, clenching his jaw. The prince's biggest and perhaps only flaw was his unyielding kindness. As heaven only knew how many had taken advantage of that naivete. The trio made their way to the Calypso kingdom together. And it was tricky at first, as they were unsure of their surroundings, but they adapted quickly. The kingdom was filled with European-style architecture marked by countless statues of Calypso, the god of shadows. To avoid unwanted attention, Arthur donned a hooded cloak to hide his eyes. Everyone in the realm knew that red eyes signified royal blood, and revealing that would make him a target. Assassinations were far from uncommon in this land. Once at the prince's palace, a stunning structure nestled by a lake, Saul and Cynthia were welcomed inside. The next day, they were informed their training would commence. Finally, Saul could sleep without the constant fear of running into man-eating monsters at local inns.